In this video, I'm going to show you one of my favorite products to make for small art fairs, craft fairs, and gift shops that I can leave behind for the holiday season. They're little minis! This is a 3-inch little canvas guy. I've already primed it with my favorite quinacridone magenta, which I use under most of my paintings. And I've got a little black easel here. Sometimes I have to paint them, but they also come natural wood if you'd like. And these are some of the simple tools I'm going to use. Some painting knives and one little bitty flat guy. I've got another bristle brush that I use later on, but you really don't need anything too fancy. If anything, bigger brushes can go faster and you're not bogging details, even with these little guys. I am going to start putting a layout just on this little guy with a charcoal pencil. I'll use charcoal pencils because then my hands don't get quite as dirty and they're not quite as brittle. Although if you drop the pencil, the charcoal can break out of it, and that's true of most art pencils in general. So if you find yourself sharpening them and the lid keeps on dropping out, it's probably been dropped. That will break inside the pencil. Charcoal, not so much. I'm not so sure. The layout here is going to be super simple because I really don't need much to get me going. The brushes are so big and I'm not painting anything specific. I would probably draw more accurately and a bit more details if I was recreating something, but I'm not doing that here. I usually start back to front like they usually say in most traditional paintings, where you start farthest away from you and move forward. That way you've got a good sense of depth, you're kind of controlling your values a little bit, and whatever is in the foreground, even if it overlaps another brush stroke you did, it's in front of it. It's kind of brings it closer to you and you get a little easier to overlap. Depends on what you do. Sometimes you want a little, I call it a moat, where you see the underpainting next to the brush strokes, and if you leave enough of a moat or a gap in between, that overlap is not going to matter as much, but my style still tends to overlap a lot. And I'm just talking about the process as I'm doing here. So it's almost a real-time video. I do speed up a little bit later on, only because it's not as exciting to watch when you do smaller and smaller details. There's not as much you can see. But other than that, this is a real-time video of a palette that you can't see off screen. I was mixing this dull greenish blue to stick on the background, even on top of the pink, so I don't leave too much of that pink, honestly. I want to leave more because it can really affect the painting, but I don't. And here's some green going on. I'm using a flat brush. It's a flat bristle brush instead of, like, I shouldn't say bristle. It's a nylon. I'm sorry, my bad. The other one you see up there is a bristle brush, and it's going to be too abstract for this size of a canvas. I want the texture to go on top. Right now, this little nylon brush with the flat corners are going to help me make strong lines where I want them, and let me control the paint a little bit better for this layer, but I do a bit of layers for this little guy. I love making these for art fairs and craft fairs. It makes a great piece of art that right now sell for under 20 bucks if they're in person, because it's so hard to find original art for under 20 bucks. So that's kind of my goal with this. If I can make them fast enough and they dry fast enough. I sold them with a little easel all packaged up and boxed up, and I highly recommend trying little minis for anyone who's looking for a unique, original to you art product, either for a gift or something to sell, because we all need those little small grabby items that are impulse buys, they like to call them, where it's cheap enough, they don't have to think too hard. It could be the cost of a lunch, some gas, but I mean, anything you eat, it's hard to compare art to, because you need to eat, it's life. Art is soul food, and this is like a little touch of my heart, my effort. You can see the oomph behind the artist in this, so don't always, I make the mistake of comparing my art to food and practical items. Art's a different kind of practical. So, impulse buy for the art people that love the art, that see the sculptural little physical oomph behind it. And I love that about art and big paintings. So I'm trying to recreate what I like about that in a little format, which can actually be trickier because abstracts are often seen better from farther away, which means the larger the better. All those little details and textures blend together to make a better overall painting. The closer you are to it, the more all of those inconsistencies and idiosyncrasies, I think I got that word right, the more visible those are. But you know what? That's the wabi-sabi of this whole thing. People still love these little things. They're great for souvenirs. Like I said, for gifts to grab. You don't have to think about it as an investment piece, which is what I call the larger artworks that cost like $100 or more. Because if people's walking around being a tourist or just around town and they stumble upon an art fair, they probably didn't budget to buy a $70 painting. Some don't mind dropping that when they fall in love, and that's fine with me. That pays my bills, and I appreciate that. But sometimes it's not a wise choice for the customer. So I try to make these little guys so you can grab a piece of my style and what I do, and maybe they'll remember me later on when they're ready for a larger investment piece, and that's fine. Or it's a nice little gift. They travel well, so these, the tote bags, small framed things, are not going to break when someone's traveling, either on lakeshore or some kind of tourist event where they've flown in. There's a couple larger festivals I'll do that people travel, I don't know about internationally, maybe internationally. I think I've got one piece that actually has gone to Japan, maybe. That was a couple years ago. There's definitely people from farther away with states, but if they travel by plane, they need something that's not going to break, something that they're not worried about too much. So small glass frames, even that feels tricky to me. But these little tiny paintings, pretty indestructible when it comes to luggage, I hope. Granted, if there's anyone out there that's bought one of these and got squished, let me know. I'm kind of curious how these are holding up. I can't really guarantee what your dog's going to do to it, but I like to think of them as pretty sturdy. Another reason I do acrylic, not only is the drying time, but it's plastic. You can wipe it off with a damp rag or towel if it gets dusty. And that's probably making a whole bunch of fine art people just cringe, and I can hear the masters just turning over in their graves right now about saying that. But quite frankly, acrylic is plastic. You need to live with art. And if you want to invest in oil painting, go for it. Oil paint is awesome. I like acrylic. And it's plastic. It's one of the good things about plastic is that it's handleable a little bit more, I think. And you can wipe it off. It's plastic. It's designed to last. I do wish I had another option for single-use plastic besides the sleeves I put them in. But until there's good options that come along, I'm glad we have the technology that we do right now. And they look very snazzy for little gifts. They can pop right in their suitcase and be off with. So they're quite popular. And the fact that I can whip one of these little guys out in about 15-20 minutes, and then that varies a lot depending on what subject I'm doing, how warmed up I am, and things like that. But if you can get it down to that or less, that's going to be worthwhile for everybody. Because if you're selling these for under 20, you should not be taking an hour to do them. This is where the business mind of art comes in. So if you're making this as a little product for art fairs or gifts, that's where the math brain comes in of making sure it's worthwhile to you. You're spending it on materials, and your time is probably your biggest cost. And people who buy this want to make sure you're making a living at this too, honestly. That's one reason they support you, because you are a maker putting your time and effort and brain into making this amazing little piece of your heart that you sell. Yeah, you're selling it. It's a product, but it's also a quality item. It's totally different when they're one of a kind and handmade, but you still have to make sure those numbers are doing the right thing for you, which makes it really tricky to see individually made greeting cards for $5 and $7. It's so hard to see. They're selling themselves short. You could be making so much more, and it's not about money. It's about honoring and valuing your time. And your customer is going to get that if they're looking for a handmade, one-of-a-kind product. if they see these and your individually made greeting cards and they're asking for discounts, odds are either they just didn't have the cash with them or didn't plan for it, or they're looking for a deal. They may not be looking for one-of-a-kind art. And that's up to you for how you want to deal with that transaction. I've absolutely done batch deals, especially if looking for gifts, want to order a bunch, and sometimes I'm not a giant fan of giving more discounts for my one-of-a-kind work because I put so much time into them, and currently, year 2025, I consider my prices pretty reasonable for what I do. So another tip for when you're making all of your artwork and you don't know what you're doing with pricing, which is a whole nother long video, just research other artists similar on your level. I find Etsy really good for this because it's a lot of used to be a lot of smaller artists where you can find smaller artists on the internet, or if you're starting out as smaller, or Google, things like that. Finding someone with a similar level of experience and what they're charging for a similar size work. Now when you do that, try to find at least 8 to a dozen that you're looking at, because people have all different levels of fame, experience. Where they're located is totally different for how you price things as well, just because of what the market can handle. That's all I'll say about that. That's what I have done for my larger paintings, and so far what I've got going for these guys works pretty well. But that's a great tip for anyone who's struggling or working on pricing, the short and sweet version of that. I love this little painting knife. It's basically like a comb at the end. I almost just have to scrape with it. There's not much else I can do to lay down with it unless I'm doing super thick. You'll see me doing lighter colors in the background for this little guy, and I'll go back and forth with more colors and textures into the foreground, and you'll see me working closer and closer together towards me in a way to get that depth on this little painting. I usually sign the back of them because my signature, I don't want it to take up too much room on the front. I don't want it to overpower the painting on the front because it's so small, but also it's really textured on the front as well, and there's not really any room to put initials. Sometimes I'll initials, sometimes I'll do the side of it. Something else you can do with these is put magnets on the back because they're so little. There's a little opening on the back of these canvases because they're technically tiny stretch canvases that you could probably put a magnet inside that opening. Sometimes I have to stack it up a little bit because it's too deep, but it's a perfect size for that, perfect weight for that. And another merchandising thing you can do for your customers, I'm all for versatility of display, and I love inventing and discovering and sharing new ways of sharing that. Not that that's new. You see tons of those at art fairs and places like that people make their own magnets. But here's another way of displaying tiny little art. Part of me wonders if I can paint even smaller and turn it into a necklace. The reason I don't do that is because there are so many jewelry vendors out there. They do an amazing job with what they do. This is totally different. But if you were to make jewelry out of tiny paintings, please keep in mind most shows are juried, and even craft shows, the good organizers will try to mix you up compared to what you have. So they need to know if you have jewelry. Sometimes there's too much jewelry, and being next to someone else who sells jewelry can be a challenge for you and them. It creates a weird kind of competition. Although, when things are one of a kind, I struggle to think of competition, honestly. Unless you're actively plagiarizing somebody, it's not something I worry about. When you put enough of your own heart and soul into these little things, someone isn't even buying the painting or the jewelry at that point. They're buying a part of you. They're investing in something that they also resonated with. So being one of a kind with your art, especially these days, I am not worried too much about that, even when I am put close to other artists who do the same thing in different kind of art fairs. Not horribly a big deal, but keep that in mind. If you do turn this into jewelry and other products, put that on your application because it honors the host and the other vendors that are out there. So other product ideas for that little thing. I think these look amazing in tiny little frames. I'll find little wood boxes at places like Michael's and Hobby Lobby, garage sales, clearance things, those little sayings and quote boxes. I'll just paint those black and stick smart in there. I'll find lots of frames, like garage sales, things like that. Usually I try to always get regular real wood and paint them all black. That way it matches in my booth and creates a nice neutral for someone in their house. Although I tend to not frame too many of my big ones. Anyway, back to the little dudes here. I'm going around the edges with this little guy so at least it blends in and doesn't stick out too much because these are not going to be framed. I don't have to worry about the edges being too textured. So I'll go right up to the edge with that, because if you're working on a larger piece of art and you take that super thick impasto all the way to the edge, there's a lot of frames that won't fit because they've got an overlap that needs to be snug to the painting, so that can make a difference. This little guy, I'm all for it. If anything, I think it'd be really fun to do more texture that sticks outside the edge, so it's kind of a painting outside the box of this little square. Here you see me going back with some more sky color because the other sky layer has already dried, and this is real-time painting so far. 16 minutes, definitely dry underneath there. Depends on the kind of weather and time of year as well, where you're at. But I'll go on top with larger brush strokes. That square little brush is making lovely edges in there, and I'm tightening up the layer where I want the forest background to be. Can't remember if I go back into that one or not. On the item I see in front of me, you can see a bit more of the pink poking through there, that quinacridone magenta underneath it. Tinting that a little bit red with either a naphthol red, quinacridone, or a cadmium red is really nice. Those are very warm, toasty colors that break up blue and green landscapes. I like to do Naples yellow. It's a lovely, rich, mellow yellow that's still strong. And that's great for underneath winter scenes, so it's not quite of a heat underneath it, but it still warms up the rest of the picture. So I highly recommend playing around with other underpaintings. It can make the other painting go faster because you don't have to worry about touching every little corner to every other corner. It's lovely to make it poke through. Try all different kinds of colors. Bright oranges are fun. Try your neon blues and greens. Traditionally, those warmer colors, they were cheaper, which is one reason they were used traditionally, the earth tones, but they can also warm up a painting if you're doing a lot of landscapes that are blues and greens. They can be so blue and green that I don't really like it when it's solid blue and green, honestly. It's a good way to balance the colors out a little bit and make it poke through. That's what I like to do. That's my style. You do what you want. Also recommend tiny collages on these things. I have done small amounts of air dry clay that glue on these, or just adhere as they dry very nicely, and it's wonderful to do small high relief, bas relief on this little work and practice for big ones. You can also turn these into ornaments pretty well. I think if you put a little small eye screw on the top, good luck with your fingers because you are putting those into solid, tiny wood with your fingertips, and I find that challenging. But you have your own system, but I think it would make an amazing ornament. I should make more of those. We are getting into the detail portion of this where my phone wanted to focus on my hands and not the painting, and I didn't realize that as I kept on painting. So this is actually sped up twice as fast. Since we're doing details, it's not as dramatic anyway, and you can kind of squint to get the landscape, which is what Impressionism is all about anyway. Not details, not these guys. More flowers, more background. But yeah, ornaments, magnets, small gift paintings. There are small canvases slightly larger than this. You get different sizes, different shapes, and not only are they just a tiny little piece of art which looks snazzy, but you can make them different sizes and shapes and products as well. Which comes to me, different sizes are a great way to work. I'll play with different colors, schemes, and compositions of a similar theme, make them bigger and bigger. Gives you different price points for people and lets you play with colors and compositions on a smaller scale, so you're using your time and materials wisely as you play around. Highly recommend that. We're coming around to the long end of this whole thing right here. So this probably took me less than a half an hour altogether, partially because I was messing around with the camera, but they'll take you less time. There's the little finished guy right there and the frame that it's gonna get. It was still kind of goopy, so I absolutely just squashed some paint on that frame and had to paint it again. Thank you all for watching. I hope this was a great idea for your wonderful art career, product, gift, whatever you want to make with these guys. And have a great day, everyone. Thanks for watching. Bye.